Works. Okay, our next session today is going to be interesting. I talked about mobile and how we think mobile is going to be very, very big in the database space. And Rich Morrow from GigaOm is going to kick off this panel, and we're going to discuss the future of mobile. And Rich, we're going to talk about the devices, or mostly, right?
Totally, yeah. We're going to take a look at devices, apps, app development, infrastructure, a lot of cool stuff, very forward-thinking, that rolls into a lot of the things Couchbase is trying to do. So I just want to say this, if there is one panel that I could pick on the planet to tell us about the future of mobile dev that I would trust, it's these 5 gentlemen right here. So what I think I'll do is let them each kick off a self-intro. We'll go through that, we'll talk about this a little bit, and then we'll just start picking their brains for what they can tell us here. Do you want to start down on the end, Lauren?
Sure. My name is Lauren Beer. I work for Adobe on the PhoneGap Cordova project. Cordova is an open source framework for developing cross-platform mobile apps using web tech, and currently I'm the BlackBerry 10 lead.
I'm Jeff Hartley. I'm from the product team at Sencha, and we build HTML5 JavaScript frameworks for building mobile apps as well as desktop apps.
I'm Cimarron Boozer with Apperian, and we are involved in mobile application management, which is after you build your app, how do you actually get it out to all the employees and folks in your organization?
I'm Jonathan Randy. I'm head of products at Appcelerator. We have 2 product lines, an open source SDK for cross-platform native development, hybrid, HTML5, but we also have a platform that includes that, plus API management for mobile and also analytics.
I'm Nat Friedman. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Xamarin. We have a platform developers use to build mobile apps on iOS and Android and Windows using C#. And we've also just introduced a new product called Xamarin Test Cloud, which solves the problem of, now that I built my app, how do I test it on hundreds of mobile devices and all the permutations of Android and so forth that are out there. So.
Thank you, gentlemen. So I just want to take a quick skip back to those of you who maybe have missed Yassine's keynote here, where he was talking about this slide. We've got the mainframes over there on the left, millions of users, thousands of apps. We moved to client-server. We gave birth to the internet. From that came mobile, and then now we're talking about this new Internet of Things, where we have maybe many devices connected. Maybe we have new infrastructure we need to put in place underneath that. What does the app development look like for that? What devices will we be using there? One thing that's important to note on this, if you look over at that mainframe, I'm from Boulder, Colorado, and there's a facility out there called NCAR, the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And in their museum now, they have a mainframe, a Cray computer, about this tall, about this wide. And they've got a little board next to it that talks about the device. The most important thing about that board, on the very bottom, it says, compared to the iPhone 3, the iPhone has 5 to 20 times more processing storage, blah, blah, blah. And now we're talking about each one of these things down here. So what happens when our network goes down and our computing capacity goes to the point where we have more raw computing power in these edge devices? What do things look like? And maybe that's where we could kick off the conversation. What do you guys think? Anybody's welcome to take it up there.
Well, let me start. I just, because of this conversation, I was just looking at a couple of stats, okay? And some of these you probably know. Mary Meeker and others have been following this. But last year, there were more smartphones sold than PCs. So that's the first thing that's happening. The other thing that we should be aware of, and being in this culture that we're in, we're all kind of used to the latest and greatest and the coolest and the smartphone of the day. But in context, there's still about 800-some million smartphones versus about 5.5 billion non-smartphones. Some people call them dumb phones. I don't think they're dumb. But we still haven't gotten to the point yet where that's happening. But it's clear that's the trend. So I think if you project out into the future, it's very clear that the smart device, whether that's a phone or a tablet, is going to take over. And I think that's really going to be where all of us are having to deal with the intelligence of these devices and what do you do with all that computing power at the edge. And the fact that people in not just North America, but you're talking about China, India, the developed countries have these devices which are able to do this. But not necessarily the internet connectivity. That's a whole other issue. So I think that's what I see as one of the most exciting things is this is faster, cheaper. Well, not always cheaper as we see, but faster, better, and more accessible to more people in the world.
I went on a long, before starting this company, I went on a long trip with my wife. We took a year off. We traveled. We went to 20 countries. We were all over the world. And one of the first things I did, I brought my iPhone with me. And one of the first things I did before going on that trip is I installed this app that a friend of mine wrote called Encyclopedia on the iPhone. And what it is it's a complete offline copy of Wikipedia. So you run it, you say download, and it downloads several 3.5 gigabytes of text. And so I had all of Wikipedia with me wherever we went. So it's fantastic. It's like a travel guide in my pocket. I knew everything I wanted to know about countries where we were going. You could download Wiki Travel. I think I had another app that could download Wiki Travel also. So I thought that was amazing. And then, of course, the next thing we noticed is, no matter where we went, people had phones, right? And they were mostly Nokia feature phones, and they'd play Snake or whatever, but they were also using them to do things like transact. So in Cambodia, there were 20 different companies that allow you to deposit and withdraw money using text messages. And these were like major parts of the banking infrastructure in these countries that people were using. And we met people who lived in caves who had phones. We like people without electricity, without any kind of infrastructure. So to me, I think, Sim's right. It's obvious that those will all be smartphones at one point. And what's exciting about that is that everyone in the world will have access to the same data and the same services that people in the richest countries have access to. And to me, that's what mobile's about. It's about access to data and services wherever you are. A rich interface to the data you want and services in any form factor at any time. And so, I think
Which could well be JSON.
Absolutely.
It's pretty interesting. My daughters just entered elementary and middle school, and they've never used a MacBook. They've never used a PC. All they've been given is iPads, and they have their iPhones. And so this is their interface. And I think it's interesting you talk about the rest of the world. I think the number one way in which people are going to access information, whether it's the internet or local information or information coming directly from some cloud, it's going to be through a mobile device.
Yeah, it's an important point to make, I think, is that, I've seen sales projections that say PCs will hold steady over the next 4 years. I don't see that as being true. I see mobile eating PCs' lunch money, taking their lunch money, and it's a fundamental shift in how people are interacting with the internet. It's very different between a tablet and a PC, and we were talking a little bit about this before, is that a lot of us developers and whatnot cut our teeth by messing up a computer that our parents owned because we had access to the underlying OS. Mobile devices don't offer that, but they do offer the ability for people in third world countries to be connected, as an example, and that's their sole means of connection.
And I think as the use of mobile in the third world or wherever else expands, I think the need to be able to have applications that can operate offline or on lossy networks is going to be really, really important. So some of the technology like you saw earlier today, I think is going to be critical because you're going to be dealing with a situation where you have mobility, but you maybe have a network that isn't always working, or you need to be really conservative about what data you're sending over that network. So we have to restructure the way we think about applications in some sense. And I think the point made earlier also about how, like when you were traveling, in some cases, I think if you can build really compelling mobile experiences, you can completely change the way certain business models operate. Like, for example, you mentioned Cambodia. In parts of Africa, there's all kinds of mobile transactions happening. Essentially, the mobile phone company is the bank, right? And so because these people had mobile phones before they had banks, so these people are going to have mobile phones before they have lots of things, which is going to enable whoever can deliver compelling applications to these people to radically change the way they live and build completely new business models around the fact that you're reaching these people with compelling mobile experience.
And it's not just the third world, it's the first world too. So the sort of modern architecture for apps is rich mobile interface plus cloud, right? So you're going to want access to the same data, whatever device you're on. So you need a cloud side to your app. And then you want as rich and fluid and quick an interface wherever you are, right? So frequently, mobile sessions can be incredibly short. They can be sometimes 15 seconds long. You're waiting in line for the bus, or you're running from one client meeting to another, and you want to be able to enter your data, interface. There's a company that I know, it's in town here, called Double Dutch. They built a really cool app. It's for mobile salespeople. And the idea is a sales rep is on the road, he meets a customer, he leaves the meeting, and he gets a push notification on his phone. And it says, "How did the meeting go?" He swipes the push notification, and at that point, he has two sliders he can use to input data. One is, it was great, it was a disaster. You sort of slide the slider somewhere along there. And then the other slider is how much money do you think you can get out of this customer? And it turns out, it's funny because it's just these two little things. The whole interaction takes a second, right? But that signal, fresh, in the moment, right after the meeting with the customer, can be more reliable in terms of indicating pipeline status for deals than, at the end of the day, after 6 meetings, going back and opening up Salesforce and typing in all your notes from that day's worth of meetings. And to me, that is not an app. That is a sensor embedded in the brain of the salesperson. And that's what's exciting about mobile, is that not just getting stuff to everyone all over the world, all the normal services we're used to, but the new kinds of engagement that people can have with their employees and with their customers. And it's going to be this combination of rich mobile plus cloud. And so that's why we're here. I mean, we're so excited about Couchbase Lite. The API it's phenomenally easy. We're really, we worked hard to as all these, all of us did, I think, to build a connectivity to Couchbase Lite. And we were so impressed as we started doing the work to see just how easy it is to integrate Couchbase with your app and how much power you get from that, the instant synchronization of data. So doing a little ad for it here, but truly we were impressed, and we had tons of customers who say data sync, data sync, data sync. This is our #1 problem in mobile. And so we're really enthusiastic about the future of this.
I wanted to add on to the brain of salespeople for just a moment, because that's a great topic to talk about. Because it turns out sales enablement is one of the sort of leading edge applications for mobile, because these folks are on the road all the time, right? And it also specifically addresses how do you make mobile apps actually work, and how do you make them effective, and how do you get adoption. And this is one of the very first things that people come across when they try to go from a screen, and they're saying, well, just take the thing that we have right now and just put it on a mobile device, right? That does not work. And that's one of the biggest challenges. How do you boil down the essentials? How do you really crisply do something that can be very easy for folks? I think that's one of the biggest challenges most enterprises have in trying to think about their mobile strategies too. So I think it's going to be a common thread as we go through the next couple of years, is this big transformation of all these apps that are existing today that are really screen-based onto this small device. It's still not a solved problem yet.
Right. I think there's kind of like 2 challenges too. There's one, creating the front-end app that's immersive, that does something that was never done before, but I think everybody kind of thinks or has to deal with, and that's why obviously integrations with Couchbase are so important. Everybody thinks about the connectivity next, and everybody has to create that connectivity kind of custom each time, and it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort. And so unifying those environments, exposing all those APIs to the developers, whether it's for sync services, whether it's for data, whether it's for new kinds of data. We're seeing a ton of people integrate all kinds of new types of data, whether it's the Fitbits of the world, whether it's whether it's social, whatever it is, along with business data and mixing that together. And that's something I don't think really existed a few years ago.
Really, really good point. And that's kind of a good segue, too, into this question of what tools and what technologies you guys see in the near future and maybe even far future that folks might be using to develop these sort of apps, and taking it from the, what will be the design considerations of those apps. And we might be even talking not just mobile devices, we might be talking little sensors, we might be talking Pebble wristwatches or wearables, or really like knock your brains out future thinking here. It would be interesting to hear you guys' thoughts. Anybody want to take that? Tools, technologies?
I think the key thing that you're going to want is, first of all, to be able to access the same services from any device. So whether it's a voice interface in a car, whether it's something that you wear in your clothing, whether it's a phone or a tablet or a PC, you want to get access to the same services, first of all. Second, you want to deliver a rich interface that can operate under spotty network conditions on the client device. And what that will require is the ability to share code from device to device. So that's what our customers do, is they get portability of their app logic, the data layer, et cetera, from device to device, whether it's iOS, Android, et cetera. So we haven't yet seen successful non-mobile and non-tablet form factors yet, but there's a lot of experimentation, and we're excited about Pebble and the Agent Watch, and you can build, we've got some customers who've even built Google Glass apps with Xamarin, so that's cool. But it hasn't happened yet, but it's going to. It's clear. I mean, there's, and it's funny, I was saying yesterday to somebody, I thought I was already consuming the maximum amount of computing that I could consume in my life, right? But it turns out I wasn't doing it on the toilet, I wasn't doing it immediately after I wake up in the morning before I'm even sure where I am. So there's all these times when I wasn't consuming computing.
That was too much information.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry.
So
It's information overload. It's just
It can get a lot worse.
it's not going to stop.
Yeah, but devices, we all get sort of jazzed up by thinking about, Google Glass or, some of the, biometric sensor stuff. And I don't know that I'm convinced yet of this. I mean, I think that it's interesting when you look back over just the last few years, what have been the devices that have really made a big difference, right? And that everybody sort of somehow didn't know in advance that it was going to take off, but it did. So the first one, I think, was the iPhone. And then that led to, of course, all the smartphone stuff thereafter. I mean, BlackBerry was there, but it didn't, that was sort of a previous generation. You had the iPad to some extent. And the other one is the Kindle. So I was involved in the publishing industry, and we were pounding away trying to make ebooks work. Didn't work until the Kindle came out. So it's hard to know in advance sometimes which one of these is going to just ignite everybody's imagination. They have a usability factor that just seems to fit really well. Yeah. And I'm just not personally convinced that wearing a dongle on my glasses is going to work. I don't know yet, to be honest.
At the same time, though, I mean, like Apple provided a template for successful mobile product, right? That we're not going to see, I think, broken away from in the foreseeable future. The iPhone 1 template is going to exist, but at the same time, the wearable computing I see is the biggest extension to the sensory devices that exist on the phone right now. So I don't think that anyone's going to add too much to phones themselves over the next few years, but I do see wearables as becoming much more normalized. The Google Glass is kind of contentious because of its ability to record social interaction. Right. A lot of people get really wigged out when they think you're recording them. But lots of other senses, and we're seeing the breakthrough happen in fitness primarily, and I see healthcare following suit very shortly in terms of being able to monitor all sorts of body metrics on the go, connected to devices. So I see the extensibility of hardware happening off-board.
It's interesting you bring that up. One of the companies that we just acquired is Singly, and they had a whole set of APIs available on the back end for, as I said before, fitness-related activities, like pulling that all together. And some of their customers were from the insurance. It wasn't just B2C applications. So the Aetnas of the world, all these folks, now that everybody's capturing that information, they're just starting to think about how can we integrate some of that information into their apps. And it's interesting. I mean, when the iPad first came out, I know there were a lot of skeptics out there. Like, why would I need a big phone that doesn't have a phone? And I think if I've learned anything, these things are going to evolve in such a way. If they can, wearable devices are such a fashionable thing. If you think about the industry around, eye care and eyewear, and you think about wristwatches, and you think about how personal those devices are, maybe it won't be from the manufacturers themselves, but if there are OEMs and applications that can be put on that with some of the major brands out there, they could be huge.
I think there's some interesting privacy implications around all this, or it's general social implications too, though, because of, like, if Aetna's tracking my fitness regimen, are they going to be adjusting my rates or whatever along the line, right? So I think we need to place all this in kind of that context as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting point to bring up because we've seen that kind of security and privacy concerns with social networking. Your boss is checking out your Facebook page type of stuff, right? Now you throw in medical data into that pile.
Well, in some places, like in Europe, it's flat out illegal to be looking at that stuff.
I mean, I think it's, there's all that, I agree. But I also think it's just cool to get all this data and do stuff with it. So Progressive, the auto insurance company, has this box you can get. They give you for free. You put it in your car, and then it monitors your driving habits and adjusts your insurance rates appropriately. So if you are already a safe driver, why wouldn't you do this? You get lower insurance rates. If you're already a fit person, why are you paying for people who aren't, taking care of themselves with your healthcare premium? So I think that's neat. And the other thing is, like, mobile provides these opportunities to gather data too. So Amazon has this great app called the Price Check app, or maybe that's not what they call it, but that's what I call it. And the idea is you go into a brick and mortar store and you find a product you want to buy, and you scan the product, the barcode or the front of the product. If it's like a book or a movie, it'll recognize it. And it will tell you what it costs on Amazon.com, and you can order it right there. So that's pretty neat. But what's really especially cool from the perspective of their business is you can then enter what the price is at the brick and mortar store if it's lower. And so Amazon is crowdsourcing pricing intelligence, basically, with this. They're getting data from all their customers about what people are charging for different products out there in the real world. So that's really neat. And then, of course, the other thing I'll just say to bring it back to Couchbase again is that, even a lot of our customers have said to us as they start to look at mobile, well, everyone's connected all the time. We don't really care about offline operation. We've got a network everywhere. It turns out even in cities that are richly connected, that's just not true. I mean, even in buildings, right? So we have customers, for example, McKesson has built a practice management app for doctors. It's a tablet app, and the doctor carries a tablet around from bedside to bedside as he works with patients and they prescribe medicines, and they enter things about patient care, like we're doing this, we're not doing that. It's pretty important that the data doesn't get lost if they gave a pill to a patient or something like that. There are parts of a hospital where you don't have signal, right? I mean, you can wander from one part of a building to another and not get signal. We had a big retail customer that had an in-store inspection app that they used to inspect stores, massive big box retailer in the US, and there are parts of their warehouse-style stores where they have no signal. But they want to be able to collect all the transactions and then sync them when they do get a network connection. So it's, I think it's, and you can find, we've seen graphs of ping times, like latency times, while you're on a train, which a lot of people are on a train or they're on a commute of some kind, right? And even when you do stay connected, sometimes your latency can spike on a 3G network to 5 seconds, right? So that makes the app experience very bad. So even when you do have continuous connectivity, if you have high latency, you deliver bad experiences. So locally cached data is the solution to that. And so it's a very important part of the infrastructure.
It's an interesting point to bring up about the sensitivity of some of the data. The rich experience isn't just the UI of the application, but it's enhanced by the data. And one of the interesting things, we see this over and over in a lot of customers, whether they're B2C, just independent developers, whether they're enterprises, is it's really important to get back to what the users are driving. So even in the enterprises, they're driving the need for this information. Mm-hmm. So while, of course, there's sensitivity around PII and some of this kind of stuff, some of that's going to not go away, but the demand from the users will dictate some of these new types of data that are flowing in that probably people would have been a little less comfortable just because the users are demanding it.
And that's kind of a good segue too. This is probably a good question for Apperian. What does app distribution look like when we've got millions or tens of millions of apps, and how are folks going to find these things? What are some thoughts that you guys might have on just app discovery and updating? And yeah, we're talking about a lot of things talking to each other. How is this all going to work?
Right. Well, I think we all kind of idealize what an app is, and we also think that some app store in the consumer space, there's 1 million apps in the app store. Well, the reality is, of those apps, how many of them do I really want or care about? It's going to be a very small percentage. So I think the idea of somebody trying to go through that, and figure out what makes sense is always a good idea. The question is, who's that going to be? Now, we focus on the enterprise, which is really saying, I'm a company, and I've got all these folks that work in this organization, and I want to make them more effective and efficient and have them do their job better and hopefully make their lives better, on a day-to-day basis, right? So I will go out and I'll pick some apps that I think are really good ones that we know work well, ones that we suggest, ones that we have written. And so a solution like Apperian will let you do that and let you sort of, create that environment. But then in addition to that, you have the individual who's going out to an app store on the consumer side and, putting stuff on. And that's really where the collision of BYOD, like how do you deal with the fact that somebody's got personal data and corporate data and apps, and I think that's one of the most interesting things that's going on right now is that, again, this switch from the BlackBerry mode where I worked at a company and they handed me a BlackBerry. And I said, this is an awesome thing. I could sit here and do my email and my calendar, but it's pretty clear that belonged to the company. But now people have their own iPhones or their own Android devices or tablets, or even if the company buys you a device, if somebody hands you an iPhone at your company and says, this is only for company stuff, that does not work. People are going to take pictures with it, they're going to send emails, they're going to chat. So the reality is that these devices are multi-purpose devices, and I think that's one of the most interesting challenges over the next couple of years, how we balance that, and what the technologies are. There's many different approaches to that, but the idea that these devices are so intrinsic to both our personal and business life, but you have to build systems that manage that. That's part of the problem too. It's not just about the apps, it's about the use of that data and managing that. So I think we're fascinated by that, and we try to come up with solutions, but it's going to change rapidly.
I agree. I think that's an important area. Essentially, we're an HTML5 company, so fundamentally, you can distribute our apps just with a URL, because that's
Right.
or you can package them with PhoneGap or distribute through an app store or whatever you want. So it depends. We see sort of different patterns based upon the needs of some customers. Sometimes the native distribution makes sense. Sometimes just the URL. And we have a new product called Space, where you can actually it's basically a secure container that runs on the phone that sort of separates logically. Right. Your corporate life and your business life, and we can remotely wipe, for example, just the corporate side of that. But basically, to add apps to that, they're just URLs, and there's policies you can configure around who can access those apps and when and geofence it and all that kind of stuff. So I agree. I think that's an important challenge. I think we're going to see lots of different ways to tackle it, and some ways will be relatively different or better for different companies.
We're hopefully getting over that era, and maybe not. We talked about this last night, that IT people who want to control every aspect of your life by saying, we're going to blacklist Facebook, or Angry Birds, or the forbidden Dropbox, or whatever it is that they don't like, right? And that just doesn't work, because people are smart enough, even the salespeople, I'm just making fun of salespeople because I like to do that, can figure out ways around this, Oh, we're not going to let them open an attachment. Okay, I'm going to just forward everything to Google. I mean, you cannot enforce a lot of this stuff through the sort of draconian, hit everybody with a hammer. You have to make it a good experience, make your employees want to come to you and say, hey, give me some great apps, and give them a great experience. And this is where all of you guys are involved in this, and building apps that are exciting, that are fast, that work offline, that have the features that people want, instead of saying, well, just don't do this. But we are really at this point now where companies are starting to realize they have to empower their employees very differently than they did a couple years ago. So that's where we are, but it's still not a solved problem. We're still in that sort of turbulent space right now, with all the different devices and operating systems and issues. And so, we're sort of Switzerland, if you think. We don't really care what device you have. We don't really care how you build your apps. We just want to make sure everybody gets them.
And let's go, so that's great, awesome feedback on the software side. And then we talk about, we had talked quite a bit about this last night as well, about the fragmentation of devices. And this is possibly something that everybody here has a say in. What's going to happen? Right now we've got, a handful of platforms. What we are going to have today, I think, we're going to have dozens of platforms we've got to support. What are some patterns that you guys have seen that we can, developers you could share with folks that they should be on the lookout when that wave hits and you've got to support 20, 30, 40, 50, 200 different devices, actual different OSs and so forth? What's that going to look like?
We've seen like a dominant players in the mobile market, rise and recede a couple of times now between Symbian, between BlackBerry, iOS, Android. I think one thing that's clear is that the story of the future of mobile, regardless of who's leading the show, regardless of who has control over their supply chain. So one of the reasons why Samsung is able to produce so many phones is because their hardware supplier, iOS has Apple has a lot of control over their hardware, and then the HTC One, which is a great device, has trouble supply and demand because they have a hardware bottleneck. So there's all these stories that go on behind the scenes about what makes a successful device, but one way or another, it's going to be multi-platform, the mobile space. That hasn't changed. And targeting, especially for software that you might want to be longer lived, especially enterprise software, targeting one single platform, investing in the native environment, and then having that environment disappear in terms of your employees actually wanting that device. Not a great rate of return, not a great investment. So I think, I wouldn't consider developing a mobile app on a framework that wasn't multi-platform, and one that doesn't promise to be ported to the next dominant platform.
Yeah, what we often tell people is if you don't use a platform, you're going to end up building one. So, because you'll need to adjust. And there was lots of people who, 4 or 5 years ago said, I'm going to build a smartphone app, and well, iPhone is dominant. It's the most exciting smartphone platform, so we'll just build it in Objective-C. And 50,000 lines of code later, they're locked into iPhone, and suddenly now iPhone has 25, 30% install-based market share. And so now they have to address Android. And so what we're seeing is people now spinning up a second team using a second language, totally different set of tools to replicate the same code base. You have the siloed development style, which is bizarrely normal. It's what a lot of companies are doing, but it's very painful because you lose all your agility and you're slow. You're doing everything 2 or 3 times. So So that's a big bummer. I think you're right. I think whatever happens, we'll see more change and we'll see more platforms and more form factors. I mean, we started with phone, and now we've got tablets and phablets, and we're going to have other things. And from a sort of a diversity perspective, Android, of course, is the source of the most diversity. In fact, we've been really surprised. We've been looking, with our testing product, addressing that. It's one of our big goals. And it turns out that if you want to select, I was talking to the guy who runs mobile engineering at Facebook, Mike Shaver, and he told me that I asked him how they test Facebook's app on mobile, and Android especially, and he said that their original idea was just to test on the top 100 devices. So they went into their database of devices, and they selected out the top 100, and it turned out to only cover a third of the users. And like 250 only covered like a little over half or something like that. So the top Android market share device is the Samsung Galaxy S4, which has about a little less than 9% market share, and then it falls off really quickly from there. So it's diverse, and Google's got a really interesting strategy with Google Play Services to sort of try to reunify Android, but there's going to be increasing diversity, and Samsung alone has 27 screen sizes. So you've got to build an app with portability in mind. You've got to use a platform. If you don't, you're going to end up using one or building one yourself. And I think we're just going to be, it's exciting for users, right? It's great for users. They get access to their data no matter where they are. No matter how big their pocket is, they can find a device that fits in it. So it's pretty cool.
Given the proliferation of form factors, OSs, and there will be more, I agree with what everybody's saying. There's so many implications downstream. So everybody thinks first about. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you go.
Okay. Better? Okay. What I was saying, there's this proliferation of devices and OSs, and I totally agree with that. But there's so many implications downstream. I mean, people rarely think, to your point of testing. I mean, probably 95% of all the testing out there today that somebody does, and if user experience is so darn important, how can you really release an app that you want to be successful, whether it's in a company or whether it's not, that hasn't been tested, performance or functional? And so there are implications to all those form factors, and with everything being manual, I mean, we've seen like a couple of our financial customers, a couple of the, across every sector actually, up to 60-70% of the time to get an app out is manual testing. And if you can automate some of that, it's huge. You can cut that by 90%. So when it gets all about innovation, getting new capabilities, new APIs, new features, and this is just the client side, not even talking about what you're connecting to on the back end. So, it's funny. Everybody thinks that mobile is just the front-end application. It really is the entire mobile system, and you have to account for that. You have to account for the visibility of that app once it's out there, and with all the form factors and devices, you have to have a platform. Otherwise, you just don't have visibility into all the pieces of the deployment and the success of that app later.
Good point. And we got just a couple more minutes. I wanted to just ask you guys, when we get to this whole device-to-device era, what particular app would you like to see? And I'll go first. I would love to be able to play live Hold'em poker with other people on the airplane while I'm waiting around. So we could just start with Lauren.
I don't know. I think a lot of people have, you always know one person, right, that's been bitten by the Ingress bug. Had a coworker walk into a pool while playing Ingress on the street. I'd like to see more augmented reality gaming and things like that. We discussed earlier about the way we interact with our computers is changing because the nature of the UI is changing, and I think it's massively simplified. I think the upshot is that we can offer new ways for people to interact, and that's really exciting.
I think there's a couple things internally with the release of iOS 7. There's the notion of iBeacon, and there's a Estimo company here in the city that just talked about how they're going to integrate and release some capabilities next year, and along PayPal doing the same thing, just making the whole user experience from a retail perspective a ton easier. I mean, being able to walk down an aisle, get a promotion or a coupon or a discount for something right there that you're looking at, and then be able to pay for it right there. It's pretty convenient. I think it's all about convenience.
Everybody else want to chip? Okay.
I think privacy is a big concern, obviously, but I think we've discovered, what we've learned is that if there's any advantage that you get personally in your life by giving up privacy, people generally take that. And so, we carry these phones that track us. We use Visa cards and MasterCards and American Expresses because it's nice to have cash everywhere. And so I think if there's any advantage to wearable devices, people will start to adopt those too. If you can lower your insurance with a Fitbit, you'll use that. So to me, that's the exciting thing, is how do we empower people with mobile devices, and how do we give them access? I mean, there's a big disadvantage now. Try to get a taxi in San Francisco without a smartphone. It's like impossible, right? All my friends who visit from out of country are like, how do you get a taxi around here? I'm like, well, you use Uber.
I'd argue that smartphones have made getting a taxi in San Francisco possible.
Right.
There we go. Finally, it is possible.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, gang, I think we are right about the time we're ready to wrap up. So I just want to thank our panelists. Great insights. I really appreciated hearing all your perspectives.